I think you're a little late. I think it's past that time.
Merry Christmas and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Kellet, your host. Thanks for being here with us on this fourth day of Christmas. We have 12 days of Christmas, and this is the fourth one. And so we get to keep saying Merry Christmas all the way up until and through the 5th of January. And as I've been saying, for some Catholics, old school Catholics, they'll still say Merry Christmas right up until February 2nd, which is the Candlemas, which... that used to be the end of the Christmas season. So we can, Catholics, you can just keep celebrating the birth of the Lord as long as you want. Just keep it up. Keep it going. This time we got Karlo Broussard with us, first of all, for both hours. And Carlo, of course, apologist here at Catholic Answers, author of a whole bunch of books, including Meeting the Protestant Response and Meeting the Protestant Challenge and Meeting the Protestant Response, but now the author of a new book coming out, which I want to hear about. Hi, Carlo.
Hey, Si.
Merry Christmas.
Same to you, brother.
Thank you very, very much. But they moved up your book. They're so excited about it. They're like, let's get this thing out.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that was the primary reason.
No, that's the reason.
There were some other practical reasons. But yeah, I was expecting my new book to be released in the fall of 23. That was the initial projected time frame. But given certain circumstances, they were able to bump it up to be released this upcoming spring of 23. And the title of the book is The New Relativism, Unmasking the Philosophy of Woke Moralists. So I'm going through 10 modern moral absolutes and exposing them for the relativistic thinking that these absolutes mask. So it's basically unmasking the absolute verbiage, thou shalt not be a white supremacist, thou shalt not impose your beliefs, thou shalt not be intolerant, thou shalt not say he or she, right?
Yeah,
and exposing the relativism that's lurking behind these moral absolutes in order to address the claim that relativism is dead, both within Christian circles and non-Christian circles.
Because people will say relativism is dead. Look, there's so many rules.
Right.
And everybody, and you all got to follow these rules. That means relativism is dead. You're saying, no, this is just relativism in disguise.
Indeed, I am. Yeah, that's the main thesis of the book. And then also to equip people, right, in order to engage these modern absolutes, not just to say, hey, that's relativism behind it, right?
Yeah.
That's one purpose of the book, but also to help people critique these modern absolutes and to show the incoherencies embedded in these modern absolutes, and that they don't make sense. They don't stand up to the scrutiny of reason once we begin to unpack it. And then I offer alternative absolutes, like real absolutes that are not relativistic in thinking, and absolutes that are actually going to comport or be consistent with who and what we are as human beings and what's going to lead us to authentic human happiness.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it. I do think this is something kids, young people need now. And
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that you were telling me that Todd edited the book in a way that it's quite accessible. You can read it with your teenage kids. You can give it to them before they head off to college.
That's right. So as the subtitle suggests, there's some philosophy involved.
Yeah.
But given the work that we've done together as a team, myself, Todd, and Drew Belsky, our co-editor, we were able to work and massage the language in a way that it's robust philosophically, but it's digestible, right? It's a good read. It's a smooth read, and going through the arguments and critiquing these modern absolutes that your 13, your 14, your 15-year-old will be able to get, and most importantly, your senior in high school who's going off to college, or one in college, or even just your regular Joe Blow sitting in the pew. I was just in Louisiana. A shout out to all my Cajun people out there. I was at Elizabeth Ann Seton in Lafayette, Louisiana. The first night, the pastor said, I want relativism. And so I prefaced it. It's going to be a little heavy lifting, because we're engaging in some philosophy, but I had positive feedback after the talk and saying that was well explained. It was heady stuff, but you were able to explain it in a clear and persuasive way, giving them arrows in the quiver to shoot at the targets of these modern absolutes. And, what do we say when somebody says, oh, you're being a hateful, judgmental bigot, or you're being intolerant because you oppose same-sex sexual activity, or you oppose all of the lifestyle choices associated with the LGBTQ plus community? What do we say in response to that? When somebody comes up and says, you're a white supremacist, right? What do we say in response to that? And so that's what the book is offering, those tools needed to be able to engage in that conversation, which, as you pointed out, is so crucial for young people going off to college and in college, because that's sort of the hotbed of these modern woke absolutes.
I don't think you can even pre-order the book yet. But
no, not yet.
Soon, they'll
soon, absolutely, yeah. I don't know when that pre-order will become available.
We'll talk about it on the air.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Okay. But we just finished the manuscript, sent it off to start getting the typesetting done, and so I'm sure the pre-orders will be coming around the corner there.
I'm not going to give out the number today because, in truth, we're pre-recording this show because we're taking some time for Christmas.
Did you just lie in saying it was the fourth day of Christmas?
Well, no.
Is that technically a lie?
No, it's not. It's not a lie if you're expecting the hearer to hear it on the fourth day of Christmas.
Okay,
you see what I'm saying?
Yep, we're consistent.
Wait, did I just do philosophy?
You did.
Boom! Nailed it! Did some philosophy. Oh, I got to take a break for the rest of the show. Can you cover me, Carlo? My brain's tired from all that philosophy.
We are consistent with the Thomistic view of lying, man.
Oh, really? Okay.
All
right. That's a pretty high standard, too. Don't you think so? Thomas Aquinas has a very high standard as far as
Indeed
lying
he
and
does,
deception.
Yeah, and there's a huge debate with all of that we're not going to get into.
No. But I mean, if you meet his standard, you met them all. Karlo Broussard, our guest, and here's why we won't be answering the phones. Well, for two reasons. One, we're not here. I mean, we are. It's hard to explain. We were here when we recorded this, but we're not here now. And the second part is, Carlo came up with this really cool idea this year of let's answer the drop calls sometimes. And so that's what we do. We collect up the drop calls for Carlo, and then we answer the drop calls. Because sometimes it does happen. As a matter of fact, quite often it happens that you're sitting here and you see the calls that are coming up. And there's one of them you're like, oh, I'm looking forward to getting that. But we try to be fair. We try to go in order when people call. And so sometimes you get to that, and then you're like, where did Donnie's call go? Donnie was on the line with a great question, and where did Donnie's call go? And they'll be like, Donnie had to go. Donnie had to run. Or sometimes it does happen, or not very often, but it does happen that the host will push the wrong button, and then the person never calls back. So these are the dropped calls. And it just turns out that the first one's from Donnie, Texarkana. So that's how dropped calls work. Should we do one?
Yeah, sure. Let's give it a shot. I'm ready to rock and roll, man.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Karlo Broussard is our guest. In addition to being the author of all those books, one thing I forgot to mention is he is the proprietor of the Sunday Catholic Word, which you can find at sundaycatholicword.com. We'll talk about what that is in a little bit because I do want to get to a call, but we'll give a little update on what Sunday Catholic Word is and why you should check it out every Friday when it drops. Donnie in Texarkana, Texas, was listening to EWTN Channel 130. Sirius XM satellite radio and had this question, but we weren't able to get Donnie on the air with us, so we'll do it now. Donnie asked, how do we know when the Pope is speaking infallibly? I combine those words to the Spope. When the Spope.
I know the feeling, my friend. I can tell you some stories.
So let me just do it again.
Two words that I've combined in circumstances that
where that was not a word you want. I've done that where you're like, whoa, wait a second. I was trying to say so. How do we know when the Pope is speaking infallibly?
Yeah, that's a very packed question that requires a lot of explanation and unpacking that goes beyond what we can do here. But I thought it would be good for our listeners to address it in brief here in order to provide a couple of resources for our listeners to go to in order to answer this question.
Okay.
So first and foremost, go read Jimmy Akin's book, Teaching with Authority. The whole book is basically dedicated to answering this question. And Jimmy's one of the best when it comes to this issue, and his book is fantastic. So that would be the first resource to go to. Secondly, it's important to read a document that's called the Doctrinal Commentary on the Concluding Formula of the Professio Fidei by then the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, now called the Dicastery of the Doctrine for the Doctrine of the Faith. And in that, this was issued on June 29th, 1998 for the then Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And in it, it explains what is known as the Profession of Faith, a document in which it is listed the different levels of teaching and which of those levels are infallible and what kind of assent those levels of teaching demand from us. And that's a great document to read in order to get a nice, concise, conceptual framework that you can begin to plug certain teachings into in order to know whether it's infallible or not, and the criteria that would need to be met in order to determine whether a teaching fits in one of these categories. So that would be the document. But just suffice to say for now, the Pope is infallible for sure when he teaches with a defining act where he gives a solemn definition by an ex cathedra pronouncement of something that is either a part of divine revelation or intrinsically connected to it, right? So part of divine revelation comes from sacred scripture.
So that means God revealed it.
God revealed it. Part of the deposit of faith. The Pope would be defining it, a solemn act of definition, saying it is a part of divine revelation.
So what's the intrinsically connected part?
That would be something that the Pope is defining to be necessary to hold true in order to preserve some other part of divine revelation. So, for example, the Church's teaching of monogenism, that we come from two initial parents of Adam and Eve. Currently, according to the magisterial teaching right now, the level of that teaching is non-infallible, but authoritative.
Okay.
Right? Now, that would be an example, say, of the Church, or the Pope could come out one day and say, with a solemn act, and define monogenism as being true in a definitive manner, therefore cannot be false, right? So we would know it's infallible. But if he doesn't say it is a part of revelation, he would be defining it to be true as something that we need to hold in order to protect something that we know from divine revelation, namely original sin.
Got it.
Right?
Okay, yeah.
So that would be something intrinsically connected to divine revelation. Now, there's another way. So notice I said the Pope is teaching infallibly in a defining act. Now, there's also a possibility with a non-defining act whereby the Pope confirms or reaffirms without some solemn definition something that's infallible by what we call, by way of the ordinary universal magisterium. So when the Pope confirms or reaffirms something that has always been believed by ordinary and universal magisterium to be infallible, that would be an infallible act. There's a little bit of dispute among theologians as to whether that act of the Pope would also be an infallible act.
Oh, I see.
Right?
I see, yeah.
Not to take away from the infallibility of the teaching itself by way of the ordinary and universal magisterium, but the question would be, is that act of confirmation an infallible act or not? There is a little bit of dispute among some theologians about that, but we know for sure the Pope is infallible when in a defining act where he's solemnly defining something to either be a part of divine revelation or intrinsically connected to divine revelation. And that would require different levels of assent. If it's a part of divine revelation, that would require what we call full Catholic and divine faith, because it's based on the Word of God. And if it's intrinsically connected to divine revelation, it would require what we call definitive assent, which is an assent based upon the authority of the Pope invested with an authority by Christ to teach us something to be true in an infallible way. So the basis of the assent one is the Word of God, the other is the Pope's authority. So it's, theologians draw a distinction between those two types of assent.
It's so interesting because all of that is so precise.
Yeah.
And the doctrine of papal infallibility is often just caricatured really as like, oh, you think everything the Pope says is true. But when you actually hear the doctrine, you think, well, here's the levels that the Pope can be and then can be infallible in, and here's the different levels I have to assent to that.
That's right.
Even among those levels, that's not all the same.
That is correct. Yeah. So you could say like infallible teaching is like the genus, like the major category, and then you can divide that genus up into two species. Part of divine revelation, which we would normally call dogma, and then the other species being intrinsically connected to divine revelation, which is non-dogma but still infallible.
Yeah, because if the thing that's connected to the dogma were not true, then the dogma would not be true. So it has to be true. In other words,
So an example of that would be the male-only priesthood. So currently, according to magisterial teaching, a male-only ministerial priesthood is in the category of infallible teaching,
but not as a dogma itself.
It's not dogma. It's not considered by the magisterium to be a part of divine revelation. It's considered to be what is called a level 2 teaching in this Professio Fidei.
Yeah.
It would be intrinsically connected to divine revelation.
Karlo Broussard is our guest. We're doing dropped calls today. It's a drop call open forum. All of these are questions that actually came from real people, but they couldn't stay on the line. And so now that we got a chance to do a little pre-recorded show here, we're taking those questions. We'll do more of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I'm a Dominican, and St. Dominic was an itinerant preacher who ran around and touched people's lives by open-air preaching. The radio opens the possibilities of doing this to the entire world in a very intimate sense.
EWTN Open Line Thursday with Father Brian Mulady. Tomorrow afternoon, 3 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Karlo Broussard, our guest, has a new podcast available each Friday. New meaning it started at the first week of this liturgical year, which is the first year in the Catholic Church. We have 3 in the Latin Rite of the Catholic Church. We have 3 years. It's a 3-year cycle of the liturgy, the liturgical readings follow a 3-year cycle. So Carlo's following that 3-year cycle. He started on the first day of year 1. And the Sunday readings he's looking at on Fridays, so you can prepare yourself for Mass, for Sunday Mass by listening. And it's a wonderful habit to get into, to expose yourself to the readings and to some discussion of the readings before Sunday Mass. It really opens up the Mass in many ways. But he also does it from a Catholic apologetics point of view. So he looks at the Sunday readings the way an apologist looks at the Sunday reading. So if you're ever wonder what the apologist would say about this one or that one, well, Carlo's doing it. And he's going to go through the whole 3-year cycle. So you can get all the Sunday readings for the 3-year cycle from the perspective of a Catholic apologist, someone who explains and defends the Catholic faith. And it's about how many minutes each time?
They're coming out to be roughly about 20 minutes.
So in the time it takes you to commute
anywhere from
or to
17
boil water.
to 25 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And you get it at SundayCatholicWord.com
or MrSundayPodcast.com, which brings up the merch that you can actually get now. So they actually created some stickers and a coffee mug with my cartoon logo, emphasizing and focusing on my bald head, with a white T-shirt folding my arms like Mr. Clean. Hence, Mr. Sunday. Podcast.com. And
you know that
you can get the merch.
That I want the hoodie. Is there a hoodie available yet?
That is a great question.
Because whatever the merch is, I want the hoodie version.
There is no hoodie version of it
come
yet.
on, Carlo.
But hey,
I'm not buying your merch till you got a hoodie.
Donna, if you're listening, come on, girl.
All right. As soon as we're done recording this, I'm going to talk to Donna.
There you
I
go.
want the hoodie. I'm the only person I know who has a Catholic Answers hoodie. I wear my Catholic Answers. Do you know anybody that's got a Catholic Answers
I
hoodie?
don't have one. I would like to.
I get that. $39.95. You got to part with $40 if you want it, because
we are in Christmas season, right? Well, therefore, I can't get that. It's called broke.
Yeah, right. The kids got gifts, but because I thought, I thought, I hate to say this, but I did kind of think I'm the host of the show. Maybe they'll give me one. And they were like, yeah, we'll give you one, $39.95 plus shipping. But I didn't pay the shipping because I don't care. I'll wait. You know how it's like, if you pay for the shipping, we'll get it to you in 5 days.
Yeah.
If you don't pay for the shipping, we'll get it to you before the apocalypse. And I don't care. I'm like, all right, I'll wait. I'll wait till before the apocalypse.
Yeah. But I'm excited about the Sunday Catholic Word. It's fun stuff. I'm enjoying producing it. And I'm so grateful for the team and helping me produce it. And people have been enjoying it. And like you said, we're looking at the Liturgy of the Word for each of the upcoming Sunday Masses and looking at those details that are relevant for doing apologetics, for having conversations with folks, whether it be a Protestant or a skeptic, etc. And that's what it's about. And that creates sort of a unique flavor to it because everybody and their mama does Liturgy of the Word preps, right? Like focusing on the Sunday Mass readings. Dr. Scott Hahn, John Bergsman, they do a fantastic job at it. I think Michael Barber and Brant Petrie even kind of do something on it. But this is unique because it has a little Catholic Answers flavor with it by focusing on those apologetical details.
And it's a great podcast with no hoodie. That's all. It's not a complaint, just so much as I want people to be aware. There's no hoodie yet. I want the
Yeah, so we invite our folks to go and subscribe to the podcast.
Sunday Catholic Word or MrSundayPodcast.com.
That is correct.
Let's go to Texas. We were just in Texas. All right, all our drop calls are coming from Texas so far. Mike in Texas was listening on the Catholic Answers app, and he pushed the little call and ask a question button on the app. And he asked this, but he didn't get to stay on the line. Why, as Catholics, do we have images? When did this start?
Yeah, with regard to the second question, when did this start? If we're talking about sort of public display of religious images, you have this taking place in the 3rd century in places of worship, or about the 3rd century in places of worship, possibly even into the 4th century there. But with regard to private uses of images or religious images, we have evidence dating to early 2nd century. What is known as sarcophagi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is box-like funeral receptacles for a corpse. And they most commonly have images carved in on these stone boxes. And this would be displayed either above the ground or below the ground. And then we also have 2nd century images of Jesus the Good Shepherd in the catacombs. So we have early images in the private use and a little bit of a later display of the images in public places. And of course, that would be because of the constant persecution that Christians were undergoing, having to worship in secret. You wouldn't be having a common display of religious images because they were under persecution, weren't able to allow to worship in public as such. Now, with regard to the first question of why we have images as Catholics, well, there are a few things we can say in response. So, first of all, we can say it helps us remember these holy ones, these lovers of Jesus Christ, these saints, and it inspires within us a longing to imitate them. So, this is the route that the Second Council of Nicaea took in the 8th century in 787 in response to what is known as the iconoclasts, those who were opposing religious images. It stated this: for the more frequently they are seen in artistic representation, that is, the saints, the more readily men are lifted up to the memory of their prototypes, so remembering them, and then longing after them, longing to imitate them. The Second Council of Nicaea also gave the reason of for the sake of honoring them in a visible way. It goes on to state, for the honor that is paid to the image passes on to what the image represents. And he who reveres the image reveres in it the subject represented. And of course, the Council of Trent would reaffirm that because the honor that is shown to the images is referred to the original subjects that they represent. So for the sake of honoring these holy ones. And of course, when we honor the masterpieces of the artists, we're honoring the artists. By honoring the saints, the products of God's grace, we're honoring ultimately Almighty God. Now, what's interesting is St. John Damascene gives us 7 reasons for icons or religious images of the saints in particular. And of these 7, they kind of overlap with the Second Council of Nicaea. So number 1, honoring the saints. They instruct us to live the Christian faith. So they're like books. We look to the life of a saint. We see what the saint did to live the Christian life. That instructs us on what we need to do as a Christian in order to be a saint. So it's like a living book, right? A living education about the Christian life so that we can see it in concrete form. Third, reminds us of what we've learned about the Christian faith. When we see the saint living according to the standard of Christian living out the mysteries of faith, that reminds us what we need to believe. And then there's more reasons, but I hear the music,
okay.
So I'll have to shut up and come back on the other side of the break.
We'll take a very quick break. Merry Christmas to you on this 4th day of Christmas. I'm going to read the clue when we come back to how you can get your free merchandise over at shop.catholic.com, something we're doing for the 12 days of Christmas. We'll be back with that and more from Carlo right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Kellet. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live on this 4th day of Christmas. Merry Christmas wherever you are. I hope it is a Merry Christmas. It's bowl season in America. Do you know what bowl season is? Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Like college bowls?
Yeah, college football bowls. Yeah, right. It's bowl season. I don't know who's playing in what football bowls today, but it's bowl season, and we're glad you're here with us during this Christmas season and bowl season here in the United States. And Carlo was was in the midst of answering a question from Mike in Texas, who wanted to know why Catholics have images. Why do we use images? And Carlo, you were giving reasons from St. John.
Damascene.
Yeah, St. John Damascene, right.
Yeah, so I said honoring the saints, they instruct us in the Christian faith. They're like living books, right? They remind us of what we've learned about the Christian faith. And then fourth, he says, they raise the mind to our final destiny. Fifth, they incite us to virtue and holiness. So they're moving us to want to be like them so that we can be a saint too and be holy. Six, honoring the saints, we in turn honor God, which is something I mentioned earlier. And then seven, it adorns the church building in order to give glory to God, to make this to make the place a place fitting for God's presence, right? To give glory to God. So those are seven reasons that St. John Damascene gives us, which provides for us an opportunity to reflect upon the deeper reasons behind having religious images within our places of worship, but also, too, within our homes as well.
That gives me a little segue about images, because you can if you find a certain image on the Catholic Answers Shop website right now, you can get a free gift. Each day of Christmas, we're reading a clue leading you to a book title at shop.catholic.com all through the 12 days of Christmas. Today's the fourth day of Christmas, and if you're one of the first 5 people to locate the product and use the attached promo code, you will get it for free. And the way you do that is by finding an image that matches up with the little clue that I am about to read, 4 calling birds. 4 calling birds is day 4 of Christmas, so here's your clue. This is what you're looking for at shop.catholic.com to get a free book today. Hark the herald with glory words, joyful find 4 calling birds. You look for that at shop.catholic.com. If you find an image that matches it, then you have found a free prize over there at shop.catholic.com. Hark the herald with glory words. Joyful find 4 calling birds. Shop.catholic.com.
So if you're one of the 5, each day of the 12 days, you find the clue, you get the book that day.
Right.
So you can get up to 12 books. If you're the first 5.
If you're one of the
12 days straight.
If you're listening and you're like, boom, I'm on it, and then you can. Cool. But employees and people associated with employees of Catholic Answers are accepted, not excluded. Are excluded. Yes, right.
From the game from winning the prize of the game.
Yeah, you can have the prize. You can play.
Because we can play, but we just can't get the rewards.
Sarah, are you playing right now? Well, you're supposed to be working. Are you playing the game right now at shop.catholic.com looking for the 4 calling birds? Let's take a question from Mesa. I am mixing up all my words today. It's Vicky from Mesa, Arizona, and I was about to call her Mickey. I don't know. I have a little touch of the blendos, where you blend your words together. Vicky in Mesa, Arizona, was listening to EWTN on channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio, and she called with this question, but we weren't able to get to her. So here's Vicky's question. I'm not a Catholic, but my husband is. Why do I have to become Catholic if we are all children of God? When Christ returns, will there still be a need for Catholic, Presbyterian, Episcopalian churches?
Yeah. All right. So with regard to the first question, why be Catholic if we're all children of God? So first of all, the question becomes, well, what do we mean by children of God? Either A, simply created by the Creator, and the Creator is like our Father in the metaphorical sense, or B, we're all baptized Christians, right? So, but regardless of how we're going to interpret children of God, I think the hidden assumption here, Sai, is that being Catholic doesn't really matter, right? So that's sort of what's
that is an assumption under there, right?
That's what's lurking behind the question. So in other words, it's just one way of being a child of God, however you interpret that, that's just as equal to another way of being a child of God. So being Catholic doesn't really matter. You would only... This hidden assumption would be the only reason why one would even ask this question in the first place. It doesn't matter to be Catholic. So if that's our target, well, then we can respond and say being Catholic does matter. Now, we could spend hours talking about that and unpacking that, but here's just a few thoughts to consider. Jesus wouldn't have set up the church if he didn't want us to belong to it, assuming that we have the historical justification for Jesus establishing the Catholic Church, which we would argue for. But making that assumption, and assuming that the Catholic Church was founded by Jesus, he wouldn't have set it up if he didn't want us to belong to it. So since Jesus wants us to belong to the Catholic Church, it matters to be Catholic, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, the Catholic Church has the fullness of the gifts that Christ came to give, the fullness of truth and life. And given that we want all of the stuff, all of the great gifts and the goods that Jesus has given us by coming on earth and starting the church, well, then it matters to be Catholic. Third, objectively speaking, we're in a better state in being Catholic and belonging to the Catholic Church because we have all the resources to make it to heaven. So it's a sure path to attaining the final goal of heaven and being with Christ for an everlasting existence. So that's not to say that somebody who is not Catholic cannot make it to heaven. It's just to say that we have all the stuff, all the resources necessary for getting to the destination. And so given that fact, it matters to be Catholic because objectively speaking, you have a sure path of getting to heaven. And then finally, and this is related to the previous point, to not be Catholic, objectively speaking, you're in a more deficient state. You don't have all the resources to attain the final goal of heaven. So, in some way, we can say it's going to be a little bit more difficult. It's going to be harder because you don't have access to the fullness of the truth and life that Jesus has invested to the Catholic Church and that subsists within the Catholic Church. So for these brief reasons, things to consider as to why it matters to be Catholic.
And so when Christ returns, will there still be need for Catholics, Presbyterians, Episcopalian churches? It almost seems like the answer would be, well, there'll be need for one of them. But, given what you just said. But
if by church you mean like visible structures of authority with sacraments, etc., then the answer would be no. If you mean like a church building, the answer would be no. But if you mean by church those called by God to be united to Christ with absolute perfection, well, then the answer would be yes. There won't be any more non-Catholic churches or non-Catholic beliefs because in the beatific vision you come to see with the greatest clarity possible for your mind the truth of God's revelation, which involves the establishment of the Catholic Church by Jesus Christ. So everyone will be Catholic in the sense of assenting to, accepting that truth of the Catholic faith and everything involved with it. So there will be no more, quote unquote, non-Catholics in the sense of no longer believing in what the Catholic Church proposes for us to believe. All of that will be made manifest in heaven in the beatific vision to where we'll all be Catholic.
Yeah, and for those of us who are Catholic now, we'll be Catholic in the fullest sense of
we'll be in a completed and perfected state of Catholicism.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you very much for that question. Oh, wait, now they took my question. Oh, that was Vicky in Mesa. Yeah, thanks, Vicky. I hope that was helpful to you. Call again. Maybe we'll send you a book about the Catholic faith, Vicky. We like to give away free books sometimes, and we'd also just like to talk with you. Now I'm going to go to Idaho. Michael, I'm going slowly so I don't mix this into Midaho. Michael in Idaho. That's what I'm doing, Sarah. I've been blending words together for no reason, possibly eggnog-related brain damage. I don't know.
Did you put some Irish whiskey in there, Bubba?
No. I could be damaged just by the eggnog. I don't need the other stuff. Michael in Idaho, listening on 103.3 FM. What happened to St. Peter's wife? Thank you, Michael. Finally, someone concerned about what happened to St. Peter's wife. What happened to St. Peter's wife? Was she crucified with Peter?
Now, there's
a second question.
The second. I put on here the second question because it just goes to show you that people are interested about this topic because somebody else asked the same question.
Oh, this was a drop call as well. Rose
That's right,
in York.
But just a little bit of a different flavor.
So Rose in York, Pennsylvania, who I call Rourke, listening on EWTN, she said, the Bible mentions Peter's mother-in-law. Was he married? And if he did he leave his family?
Yeah, so two great questions. So we kind of put it all together, lump it all together, and we don't know anything about Peter's wife and whether he left her to follow Christ definitively. We can only speculate. The New Testament is very, very limited in the evidence that it's giving us. So here are the facts. Peter and Andrew were from Bethsaida, John 1:44. That's kind of a key fact that comes into play. Secondly, during the ministry of Christ, they live in Capernaum. That is, Peter and Andrew do, according to Mark 1:21 and 29 through 30. Fourth, Peter's living with his mother-in-law in Capernaum. That's another biblical fact. And then finally, there's no mention of his wife. So how do we make sense of this? Well, consider this, Si. Peter's wife is either dead or alive. Okay?
I feel pretty confident that you are right about that, Carlo.
We're doing philosophy here, right?
That would seem to be correct.
Okay,
yes.
Now, let's consider the alive option. if Peter's wife is alive, Peter used to live in Bethsaida, now in Capernaum with his mother-in-law. If Peter's wife is alive, well, then either Peter left her in Bethsaida or living with her in Capernaum with his mother-in-law. Now, it's unlikely that he left her in Bethsaida because he took his mother-in-law with him to Capernaum.
And you just don't do that. You don't leave the wife and take the mother-in-law. I don't want to turn this into a mother-in-law joke, but you just don't do that.
Right. So
Okay.
it's unlikely that she's alive and he left her in Bethsaida.
Right.
Now, there are also some problems with Peter's wife living with him and his mother-in-law in Capernaum. Number one, there's an awkward silence by
About her.
all three gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And secondly, the gospel writers record and mention the mother-in-law after being healed and how she served Jesus and the disciples. And there's no mention of his wife. It seems like if his wife were there, his wife would have been serving as well with the mother-in-law and would have been mentioned. Now, it is true that this is an argument from silence, and just because there is silence and no mention of her, it does not follow that she was not there. That is true. But we're talking about plausibility here, right?
Yeah,
we're kind of speculating here. So there are some problems with the view that Peter's wife is alive and moved with Peter from Bethsaida to Capernaum. So given the problems with the alive option, it seems to me, Si, that the more plausible explanation, again, we can't be definitive on this, but the more plausible explanation is that she's not alive. Therefore,
Dead.
I'm
a philosopher at that level. I could do that calculation.
Now, somebody might counter and say, well, wait a minute. In Luke chapter 18, verses 28 through 30, Peter says, "Behold, Lord, we've left our homes and followed you." And Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, there's no man who has left house or wife or brothers or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom of God who will not receive manifold more in this time and in the age to come in eternal life." So somebody might look to this passage and say, hey, man, Peter's asking, we left our homes and we followed you, Lord. And then Jesus immediately responds and saying, yes, some of you left your wives. The implication seemingly to be that Peter would have been one who's left his wife, since the Bible talks about his mother-in-law. And that's a pretty persuasive counter there. The problem is that doesn't necessarily have to refer to Peter. It could be referring to
People
other disciples or some of the other apostles, perhaps, who may have had a wife and we don't know about it from the biblical evidence. But it doesn't necessarily have to refer to Peter. So in the end, I think it seems more plausible to say that Peter's wife simply died and was no longer with him and his mother-in-law and Andrew when living in Capernaum.
Well, but then we also have a lot of information about Peter from the Acts of the Apostles, and she doesn't show up there either. And that, so, I mean, it's...
But then one could push back and say, well, none of those instances would demand or sort of require a mentioning of her. But whenever we're talking about the mother-in-law being present there and serving Peter and Jesus, and no mention of the wife being there if she were there, I think that's a pretty plausible reasoning there.
So that would suggest, and I imagine this was quite common, that she would have died young, because, how old do you think Peter would have been following Jesus in his 20s or something? Because he died 30 years later.
Yeah. And it's important to point out, too, that we're not against the idea of Peter actually, let's just say hypothetically, Peter's wife was alive, taking care of Peter's mother-in-law in Capernaum while Peter left to go on full-time ministry with Jesus. We're not against that idea, because our Lord comes before all relationships, including husband-wife relationship. And so Peter could be called to this higher calling, just like a soldier has to leave his wife and children to go and fight for this higher good of the good of the country.
Sure.
We're not against the idea of our Lord calling Peter and Peter leaving his wife in that sense to go and follow our Lord in that ministry.
But even that wouldn't necessarily be a permanent leaving, because
that's true.
He went back to Galilee, plenty of times. All right, Michael in Idaho and Rose in York, I hope that was satisfying to you. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Drop Call Open Forum with Karlo Broussard on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
First of all, I'd like to tell you that this is the first time I've ever heard your program. It's actually the first time I've ever heard EWTN radio. I watch it on television all the time. But something told me today to turn this on, and I found you.
Sure.
I will tune in again.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. It's an open forum, but it's a dropped calls open forum. All these questions come from people who called, asked questions, but then didn't get on the air for one reason or another to ask their questions. We have resolved important issues already with Carlo, like there's only two choices, you're alive or you're dead. That one we have fully established. But lots of great questions, so let's go to Pat in Kentucky, listening on 1040 a.m. Pat asked this: what does Jesus mean when he says there will be no marriage, nor will they marry in heaven? Why would he say this if we have bodies on the final day? Won't my husband still be my husband?
Yeah, the text that Pat is referring to here, I would assume, is Matthew chapter 22, verse 30. That's where our Lord says, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. So with regard to the first question, why no marriage if we're going to have bodies? Well, the answer, I think, is that God has willed in this order of providence that there be a fixed number of the elect, which means a fixed number of human beings who will be existing in heaven and those not existing in heaven.
So that means that it's not an infinite, we'll just keep having children for infinity.
That's right. Since there's a fixed number, there's no need for new human beings in this order of providence in its final completed state. And if there's no need for new humans, well, then there's no need for the conjugal act from which comes the propagation of the human species.
Got it.
To keep it G-rated there.
Okay.
And then secondly, I think we can respond by saying the reason is the mystical marriage with Christ, which is the heavenly experience. Marriage in this life is a sign of that mystical marriage that we, the people of God, have with God. And whenever you come to experience the destination, when you arrive at the destination, when you experience the reality, well then the sign pointing to the destination or the shadow of the reality is no longer needed. And so if marriage is a sign of what is to come, of this mystical marriage, well then once you have the mystical marriage in its completed form, you no longer need the sign or the prefigurement, or whenever you have the reality, you don't need the shadow. Kind of like when you don't need the old Ark of the Covenant when you got the new Ark of the Covenant, Mary. You don't need the old Eve when you got the new Eve, Mary. You don't need the old temple when you got the true temple, Jesus, and his body, as Jesus teaches us. That's the idea, I think, behind that. Now, with regard to the question, won't my husband still be my husband? The answer is no. And we know this based on divine revelation. So the relationship that God brings into existence between a man and a woman as husband and wife, it is revealed to us that such a bond is dissolved upon death of one of the spouses. And St. Paul teaches this in Romans 7, 2-3. Here's what he writes. A married woman is bound by law to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she's discharged from the law concerning her husband. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. Why adulteress? Because if her husband is alive, she's related to that man as wife.
Yes.
And so to be living with another man is adultery. But if her husband dies, well, then she's free from the law, and if she marries another man, she's not an adulteress. The implication being that she is no longer related to that other man as wife, meaning the bond of husband and wife dissolves upon death of one of the spouses.
Yeah.
That's St. Paul's teaching. The Catechism of the Catholic Church confirms this in paragraph 2382. So if that is the case, well then in heaven we are no longer related to our spouses as spouse, as husband or wife. Does that mean we won't know about the relationship that we had with that person as husband or wife in this life? No, we're going to have a knowledge of the bond and the relationship that we had in this life. I will know in heaven, Jacqueline was my wife in this life. Hey, that rhymed. and so I will know that, but that would not cause, and then knowing that we are no longer bound as husband and wife in the heavenly existence, that will not be a source of grief for me or sorrow, because I'll be rejoicing in God's perfect wisdom and plan concerning marriage and what it's ordered to, the mystical marriage with God in heaven, the wedding feast of the Lamb and all that good stuff.
I think that's sometimes the hard thing to process as a Christian, is that the goods of this earth, we think that we'll miss them in heaven sometimes. And you're not going to miss anything because you will have the perfect good. You will have the possession of the perfect good.
And we will see with clarity how the goods of this life God has used to lead us to the ultimate good of the beatific vision and union with Christ and the perfect union that we have with all the other members of the mystical body of Christ in heaven. And that will be a great source of joy. We will recognize the goods of this life as they are, goods of this life, order to helping us attain the higher goods of the next life.
And there are goods from this life that do survive.
Indeed.
And is friendship one of those?
Of course, by virtue of being members of the mystical body of Christ, that is the perfect friendship, because charity continues to exist and is actually perfected. What is the principle of friendship? Charity.
Okay.
Charity remains in heaven, in the afterlife, and is actually perfected. And so therefore, the friendships that we have in this life by virtue of charity will be perfected in the afterlife.
So it's not true of all husbands and wives, but many husbands and wives are very good friends.
Absolutely.
And the friendship deepens over the years. And it's certainly not true of everyone. And
St. Thomas calls marriage the maximum friendship, actually.
So Pat and her husband, even though the marriage bond is severed, the friendship
does not sever. That's right. Even though the bond is no longer there, relating them to each other as husband and wife, the friendship indeed does remain.
Karlo Broussard is our guest. Pat, I hope that's helpful and actually encouraging, because heaven's really, really good. And I think it's certainly one of the temptations of this life. And I do think that it's often, the evil spirits do tempt us to think ill of heaven, like it's mostly lost because all the good stuff I've got here. Right. But that's just a temptation. You got to let go of that and realize, trust in Jesus. What's there is better than what's here.
Yeah, and that's understandable, because we don't taste in a perfect way, in a complete way, that higher good of the afterlife.
Right.
So it's based upon that trust. Like you put it perfectly, we have to trust our Lord and what he tells us, that heaven is a completed and perfected state of happiness that pales in comparison to any experience of happiness that we can possibly have in this life. Yeah. Because we've never tasted that, that's hard, right? But we have to trust our Lord, and we have good reason to trust our Lord. I mean, gosh, he rose from the dead.
Yeah, you can trust him on this.
He said he was God, and he rose from the dead and vindicated those claims. And so we can trust him on this issue and enjoy the goods of this life.
Yeah.
But not be so entrenched by them or in them, and so sort of enveloped in them that we lose sight of the great goods to come.
Yeah, right. And Jesus reminds us we have a Father in heaven. And I've always find that very comforting. It's not like you just have a God in heaven. I mean, it's good to have God in heaven and all that. But God is your Father. He's a fatherly God. Don't worry about stuff. Like, your Father's going to give you good things.
Absolutely. So the desire that we have to have the big daddy figure protecting us, that's actually going to be fulfilled. Sigmund Freud was somewhat right.
Go Sigmund! I appreciate it. All right, so we got a lot more questions coming up. It's the 4th day of Christmas. I hope you're having a Merry Christmas. We're having a Merry Christmas here with Karlo Broussard answering the questions. So hang on. Don't dial, because we're not taking calls today. All the questions are what we call dropped calls. We got the question, we wrote it down, we were ready to answer it, and then the person dropped on the line, and so now we get to answer their calls during this Christmas season. We'll do that with Carlo right after this on Catholic Answers Live. And don't forget, SundayCatholicWord.com. That's where you can go and get Carlo's podcast, SundayCatholicWord.com. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, and Merry Christmas to you on this fourth day of Christmas. I'm Cy Kellet, your host. Karlo Broussard is our guest, and we're doing drop call, open forum, all the calls that we didn't get to before during the year. Well, not all the calls, but a bunch of calls that we didn't get to before because the caller dropped, but we were like, well, we like that question. We'll answer it later. And so today is the day. Today is later. Today is the day we get to do that. Carlo, thanks for coming back.
Oh, it's great to be back with you, Cy. Merry Christmas to you, buddy.
Merry Christmas. Thank you very, very much. Sarah, who's just really good at running the board, is running the board today. But Chris Check brought some King Charles Spaniels, or at least one King Charles Spaniel, into the building. You ran out of here so fast at the break to see that King Charles Spaniel.
They call it puppy therapy.
Is that where you went to see the dog?
I did.
Yeah. Was it one dog, or did he bring multiple dogs?
He brought two dogs.
Two King Charles Spaniels.
I didn't even know what was in customer service. I just felt it.
You just felt there's something cute in the building. I've got to move. Yeah, I don't even know if you turned the microphones off. You just out of here. To see the King Charles Spaniels. Well, is that what they're doing in customer service right now? They're just visiting with King Charles Spaniels?
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful?
That's what we do here at Catholic Answers.
Yeah.
We enjoy all the creaturely goods of God's created order.
Right, and there's very few creatures sweeter than a King Charles Spaniel puppy. So, I'm glad you came back for this hour.
Oh, never mind.
There are no what? Oh, no, don't. I know what you're going to say. No, you're not. Merry Christmas, Carlo.
We're going to get some evil emails, man.
Carlo's message is, repent and believe the bad news. No, we don't need you delivering bad news today, Carlo.
All right.
Look at those stockings back there.
Yeah, they look good, man. I like the decoration. We got the festive lights in the hallways here at Catholic Answers, Christmas trees in every corner.
We got two Charlie Brown Christmas trees right behind us, and then a real Christmas tree over here.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man.
It feels very, very Christmassy, and there's puppies in the building. And a lot of things with sugar in them have been in this building this week. It doesn't matter to Carlo. He doesn't care. Carlo's like, is it made out of meat? Okay, then I'm not eating it. What'd they make that cookie out? Is it a meat cookie? Then I'm not eating it. You know what? Enjoy your low-carb lifestyle, Carlo. You enjoy that.
I do. Yeah, I do. But speaking of sweet things, we got you, Cy.
Oh. Just give me a minute to pull myself. Oh, man. Don't get me going. Don't get the waterworks going, Carlo.
Just by your presence, you create a festive atmosphere,
Thank you,
man.
Carlo. Thank you very, very much. It does feel festive. I like the feeling of Christmas. I know you do. You're very nice, Carlo. All right, let's go to Canada for a question.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Let's do it.
Montreal. Montreal. That was us doing some Canadian French. I hope you enjoyed that, Canada. That's our special Christmas gift to you.
Matt Nelson, don't call me, buddy.
All right, Guillaume in Montreal, Canada. Is that French for William? Guillaume?
I don't
know either. I hope it is. His name is William, and he was listening on the Catholic Answers website, and he said, if we are surrounded by a crowd of witnesses, is it reasonable to believe that our deceased loved ones and the saints are aware of what we are doing and thinking, even if we cannot experience their presence? Is it reasonable to believe that my deceased loved ones are in communion with me momentarily through the body of Christ when receiving communion?
With regard to the second question, being in communion with us, the answer is yes. And that's in virtue of them being members of the mystical body of Christ. They're in communion with us via grace. With regard to the first question, are they aware of what we're doing right now, currently? And then secondly, thinking. Well, with regard to what we're doing, St. Thomas addresses this in the Prima Pars, the first part of his Summa Theologiae, question 89. He has several different articles where he's going through the knowledge that a separated soul separated from its body, would have and be able to have, and being aware of things being done here on earth. And ultimately, he answers this question in the affirmative, that they would be aware of what we're doing here on earth, but it's important to nuance the way in which they would know. So if we're talking about the separated soul's natural knowledge, like would a soul in heaven know what I'm doing here on earth by way of its natural powers or natural way of knowing things? The answer would be no, because we as rational animals our proper mode of knowing things, for my intellect to come to understand things, is to take in information from the senses. So we use, the body is playing a role in the human mode of knowing things. And even once we take in the information from our sensory apparatus, right, when we're sensing things, for the intellect to do its work, it's actually using what philosophers call phantasms, right? These images that we're conjuring up a triangle. I'm thinking of a triangle. I'm imagining a triangle, right? I'm thinking of psi. I'm imagining psi. And the intellect goes to work on that image, right? What is called a phantasm, and begins to understand what that thing is and all that good stuff. And that's the proper mode of understanding. That's the natural way of coming to know things and be aware of what's going on outside of us. So when the soul separates from the body, guess what? Soul no longer has the body to do its natural operation of knowing things as it's happening right here and right now. And so the soul, separated from the body, wouldn't be able to do that in a natural way. So the question becomes, well, how could the soul know what's going on right here and right now without the body? And Aquinas answers that the soul would know in virtue of seeing the divine essence, in the beatific vision of seeing God. In virtue of seeing God, the soul would have that knowledge in God and seeing God of what's going on in our lives here, and right now. So that's one way. That's Aquinas' position in virtue of the beatific vision. Yes, they know what's going on here right now. But there's another way. One could postulate the idea that maybe God would infuse within the intellect of the soul the knowledge that is needed. And there's a nuanced distinction between these two modes of knowing, these ways of knowing. But there's other ways, like God just downloading, so to speak, this knowledge into the intellect of what's going on here on earth. Either way you go, it's going to be a supernatural knowledge, a knowledge above the natural way, right? So no, if natural; yes, if supernatural.
Isn't that something?
To put it simply, yeah.
Could I mean, this is a little bit off of William's question. And William, I hope that answer helped you. I found that answer very, very helpful. But what about our memories? Do we have access to our memories?
Absolutely. St. Thomas, in question 89, talks about the knowledge the separated soul would have of those things already known, right?
Okay.
And memories that are sort of sealed, right, in the intellectual memory. The sense images, that's a different question, but you also have conceptual memories, right, and things that we know and we come to know that can be going beyond the senses, right, breaking the boundaries of the senses and conceptual knowledge. Aquinas does affirm, and I think he's right on this, that we will have that knowledge. Notice this question was about knowing what's going on here and now.
Right.
No, it's sort of a current and progressive coming to know.
Yeah.
And so your question is, what has already been known?
Yeah, right.
And Aquinas affirms, yes, the separated soul will have that knowledge.
How interesting.
Concerning this knowledge of right here and right now and ongoing, not naturally, but in a supernatural way. So God's going to have to be doing something on the intellect, with the intellect, in order for us to know what's going on here and now.
I can't stop asking you questions about this. I'm so interested in this.
It's going to be similar to the angels, of how the angels know what is going on. The angels don't, in their proper mode of knowing, they don't know in and through the body.
No, because they have no body.
They have no body. So the knowledge that they have is by way of kind of infused, like in philosophy we call it species or forms, right? But God is infusing this stuff in the angel's intellect. But that's natural to the angel.
Yeah.
For the soul to have that kind of knowledge, that's a supernatural kind of knowledge. That's over and above the soul's natural way of knowing things.
All right. At the risk of being shallow, I like my five senses. And when the body is resurrected, will I have the five senses, or do we
Absolutely.
not know?
You get them back. So the soul, the soul then, with the resurrected body, notice Aquinas is addressing the question of the knowledge that a separated soul has.
Right.
currently in the beatific vision. But when with the bodily resurrection, when the soul is reunited back to its body, well, then the soul then begins to know, like I, Carlo, begin to know now according to the natural mode of human knowing through the senses. So in the resurrected body side, you'll have your resurrected body, I have mine. We'll be giving each other high fives. I'll be seeing you, you'll be seeing me. Whether we're munching on sweet things or not, that's a different question.
Yeah, right. What's in heaven and available to our senses, that's a different question.
Right.
And frankly, I don't really care about that.
But we'll be knowing currently what's going on in the natural mode of human understanding.
Right.
With taking in the data through
without
our
losing
senses.
the supernatural in any way.
That's right, because the beatific vision will remain. The intellect will be knowing God's essence in that immediate, direct way without any sort of concepts. We'll be having that quote-unquote heaven experience of the beatific vision, even while we're still doing the natural way of knowing things. Yeah. And then, of course, we'll have new knowledge that's given to us by way of the completeness of the divine order of providence and history and how all things culminated with the second coming of Christ and all that fun stuff. Heaven is definitely a destiny worth living for.
I know, it sounds, when you start thinking about it, because you think of all the things that your senses will perceive when you, but you will physically see Jesus and Mary,
absolutely,
and Peter and John,
and that would be a source of great joy.
Yeah. Well, I would like to see, after all this, frankly, I'm going to be honest with you, Carlo, I would like to see Jesus face to face. Like, I don't want to go through all this and not see him face to face.
And think about this, too. I was talking to a little bit about this with Adam Minahan and David Niles on the Catholic Man Show when I was in Tulsa a few weeks ago. In the bodily resurrection, the sensory experience will be, as I like to say, humming, baby. It's going to be humming, right? It's going to be firing on all cylinders, right? So the sensory experience of the bodily resurrection is going to be heightened in a way that we cannot even imagine, because it's going to be so completed and perfected in that glorified state, where it's taking on the perfection of the soul that the soul has in the beatific vision. And so there's going to be this influx and overflow of great joy and satisfaction and pleasurable delight within the body, and the senses being heightened to perfection. I mean, listen, I got.
But none of it is going to overwhelm you, and you'll be at perfect peace because of the beatific vision. Everything will stay in perfect proportion.
Yep.
Because that's the big problem here. Like if I have an overwhelming sensory experience, it's likely to become unbalanced in some.
That's right. I'm not in this state, on this side of the veil.
Right.
I'm not going to be able to have control over that, right? And
but
so
there, because of the beatific
perfect
vision,
control.
Yeah. I kind of want to go to heaven now.
And it's given that we're in the Christmas season here.
Yeah.
That's why our Lord, the Christ child in the manger, is pointing us to this destiny. He was born for this sake, for us to experience this heavenly realm.
Thank you, Jesus. Really, you can't just stop saying thank you. You just
absolutely.
All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more questions on this fourth day of Christmas for Karlo Broussard on Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
This is Conversations with Consequences, where we delve deeper into issues affecting our church, our country, and our core, the family.
As Catholics, we need to be informed, aware, and able to talk through some of the tough topics that we're facing in our culture and in our world. Conversations with Consequences gives us the tools to do so.
It's not enough to pray. We have to be a light for the world.
Conversations with Consequences, this Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Let me give you the clue again, how to get the prize. They might all be gotten by now. I don't know. But maybe they're still available. 5 free books each day during the 12 days of Christmas at shop.catholic.com. The way you get them is you follow the clue that I'm about to give you. Look for something that matches that clue. And then when you find it, see if there's still a prize available there. 5 prizes available in all. And the clue for today, because it's the 4th day of Christmas, hark the herald with glory words. Joyful find 4 calling birds. 4 calling birds, the clue for day 4 over at shop.catholic.com.
Heaven will be a joyful find.
Yes, heaven will be. I thought that was going to be a poem. I was waiting for the second line. I was waiting for. I thought,
Dude, I'm not that savvy.
I thought this was going to be a couplet.
I am not that savvy, man.
Okay,
Sorry.
go
Sorry
on,
to
Carlo.
disappoint.
Heaven will be a joyful find, not like the earth's daily grind. Whoa! That's right. That's right. I just dropped that on you, Carlo.
But from the Christian perspective, the daily grind is infused with great joy because we do it out of love for God. So we rejoice in our sufferings, as St. Paul says in Colossians 1:24. So boom, there's your
he dropped it
joy
right back
in
on
the
me.
daily grind.
Yeah, drop some St. Paul on me out of the blue. I didn't expect that. I didn't see that coming.
But I will say that was pretty good shooting from the hip there, buddy.
Shooting from the hip because I'm on a trip. That one didn't go as well. Okay, all right. It was time to go on to the questions. Christian in San Antonio, Texas, listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network. He says, my brother argues that Jesus was supposed to be the last high priest. Why do Catholics believe that there could be more priests after Jesus?
Okay, so this is how I would begin to address this issue. Jesus is the high priest. That is true. And we do not believe that there are priests apart from Jesus or priests such that they would somehow undermine or usurp the high priestly ministry of Jesus. So even though we affirm that Jesus is the high priest, one question to pose to Christian here would be, does his priesthood exclude anyone from being a priest in any sense? And of course, he's going to have to answer no. Because St. Peter teaches in 1 Peter 2:5-9 that Christian believers are a holy priesthood, a royal priesthood, right? A holy nation. And of course, Peter is alluding to Exodus 19:6, where Israel is referred to as a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. So just because Jesus is the high priest, it does not follow from that there are no priests in any sense. Because all believers as Christians are priests. In and through Jesus Christ, the one true high priest. Following me so far?
Gotcha.
Okay. The next question is, okay, well, if Jesus' high priesthood does not necessarily exclude priests in any sense, well, then at least it's possible that there might be a group of Christian believers who are priests in a ministerial sense, and that still not usurp the unique priesthood of Jesus Christ. Because that ministerial priesthood would be participating in the unique priesthood of Jesus Christ. So the question becomes, does Jesus make any believers ministerial priests? Like Aaron and his sons were ministerial priests, even though all the Israelites were priests in some sense.
Right.
Aaron and his sons were a distinct class of priests. So the question is, did Jesus set it up that way for the new Israel of God? St. Paul calls the church the Israel of God in Galatians 6:16. In the old Israel, you had universal priesthood of all Israelites, but yet a distinct class of ministerial priests with Aaron and his sons. Paul calls us the Israel of God. We're told by Peter that all believers are the universal priesthood. We're all priests. But then, is there a ministerial priestly class like Aaron and his sons in the New Testament? And I answer yes, and the church answers yes. Of course, it's me, following the church here.
Right.
The church answers yes. And the evidence, there's a few lines of evidence that we could propose here. And I do so in my article, Did Jesus Make the Apostles Priests at the Last Supper? That would be one line of reasoning, so our listeners can check that out. At the Last Supper, Jesus tells the apostles, do this in remembrance of me, right? Now, what's interesting there, Sai, is that the Greek word for do this, or the Greek verb for do this, poieo, has sacrificial overtones. That's the Greek word used in the Septuagint, Greek version of the Hebrew Scriptures, in Exodus 29:38, Leviticus 9:7, and Psalm 66:15, with regard to offering sacrifice. Do this, poieo, has sacrificial overtones. It can be used in the sense of offering sacrifice. Even the Greek word for remembrance, anamnesis, has sacrificial overtones. For example, in the Septuagint of Numbers, in Numbers chapter 10, verse 10 of the Septuagint, sacrifices of peace offerings are said to serve you for remembrance, anamnesis, before your God. So you have these two Greek words, poieo, anamnesis, both of which in the Greek version of the Old Testament have strong sacrificial overtones. And Jesus is applying those two words to the apostles at the Last Supper. Do this in remembrance of me. In other words, offer this, right, as an offering to God, as a remembrance to God. Now, if Jesus is commanding the apostles to offer this sacrifice, well, then that implies that he intends them to be priests. Why? Because it is the job of a priest to offer sacrifice. Now, what's interesting here is that this is a command given only to the apostles within a context where only the apostles are present. It is true that we as Christian believers, as priests, offer sacrifices, but we're told to offer spiritual sacrifices. That's what Peter tells us in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5. And Paul tells us in Romans 12:1, offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. But here we have Jesus telling the apostles to offer a unique kind of sacrifice, very similar to how Aaron and his sons were to offer sacrifices in a way that the other Israelites could not offer sacrifice. And so from this truth of Christ instructing the apostles to offer the Last Supper as a sacrifice in a very unique way, the church has concluded from that biblical data that Christ is instituting the apostles as his ministerial priests, as priests to function in order to serve the universal priesthood in a way that participates in Jesus' high priestly ministry, very much like Aaron and his sons ministered to the Israelites as ministerial priests. So that's one line of evidence, and then we could look at others. Jesus giving the apostles the authority to forgive sins. Paul recognizes his ministry as a priestly ministry in Romans 15 through 6. But that I think that suffices for now to focus on the Last Supper.
Christian, it's a great question your brother has. I hope that's helpful in answering him. You can have him call us if he's got follow-up questions, or you're always welcome to call. We look forward to that. I'm going to go on to an anonymous caller. An anonymous caller was on the line, but dropped at a certain point. But here's the question. What would it take for you to have a disbelief in a deity? So does that mean like basically stop believing in God?
Right,
yeah.
Right. Is there any sort of way in virtue of which we could show that God does not exist? Now, there are some philosophers who will say no for very nuanced reasons, but I think ultimately there are a couple of ways that you could show that we should not believe in God as we understand him to be classically defined. So, number one, we could show that our concept of God contradicts some known fact. And the classic example of that is the problem of evil, right? So if God is all good, well, then no evil would exist. Evil does exist, therefore God is not all good. And if he's not all good, well, then he's not God, as we understand him in the classical way. So if our concept of God contradicts some known fact, well, then that would provide us reason to no longer believe in God as classically defined. Now, I don't think that argument works because I don't think those, especially the first premise is true. There are ways to argue against that first premise that you can have and affirm an all good God and the reality of evil.
Yeah.
Those two truths are indeed compatible with one another. We don't have time to justify that claim, but there is.
But
if
there was any fact in the universe that you could establish as a fact and say that if this fact is true, there can't be a God like you think of God,
right,
then we would have to give up our belief in God.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a legitimate path to take. And then secondly, we could show, or one could attempt to show, that our concept of God entails an intrinsic contradiction.
Yeah, okay.
So this is actually something that I'm doing for my dissertation, for my PhD in philosophy. So for example, some will say God's divine immutability, like God cannot change, and his freedom to have created otherwise. So some will say those two ideas are intrinsically incompatible with one another. But for us, in understanding God as classically defined, you got to have both. You can't give up one or the other. If God's not immutable, like if God can change, well, then he ain't God, as we classically understand him to be.
Right.
And if he's not free to have created otherwise, well, then he wouldn't be God either, because his very being would be dependent upon creatures, right? In order to be him, he's got to have creatures. Well, that would make him dependent. Well, if he's dependent on creatures...
That's not what we think of as God.
Absolutely. Right. So if you can show that there are two concepts or two aspects of our concept of God that are intrinsically incompatible, that are contradictory of one another, if that would be true, well, then we would have to give up on that concept of God. And that would be another path somebody could take. Now, as I point out, as I'm arguing for my dissertation, both of these are compatible. God is immutable, and he's free to have created otherwise.
So you can't find a fact in the universe that contradicts our belief in God.
I would argue you cannot.
And you can't find a logical inconsistency in belief in God.
I would argue you cannot.
So we can believe in God.
Absolutely.
Okay, but if you could do those things. All right, right back.
Catholic Answers Live.
The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade was a monumental victory for the pro-life movement. But the fight is far from over. With our new booklet, Why We're Pro-Life, we have produced the perfect tool to prepare you to have peaceful and convincing conversations to shed light on the truth about human life from conception to natural death. Catholic Answers is printing millions of copies of this booklet, and we plan simply to give them away. You can help us in two ways. First, by generously supporting this project. 25 cents prints one book. $2,500 prints 10,000, and so on. Second, by helping us distribute the booklet through your parish, your school, or the pro-life ministry you work with. Catholic Answers is going to blanket the country with Why We're Pro-Life, but only if you step up and help us. Thank you so much. For more information, visit whyweareprolife.com.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Kellet. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Kellet, your host. Karlo Broussard is our guest. Merry Christmas. It's the fourth day of Christmas. That anonymous question asking which is a question we often get from, we don't know if this person is atheist or not. It could be just a person who wants to know, how do you answer this kind of question? But one thing that I do want to encourage in the coming year, in the year 2023, is more atheists to call, because we really do enjoy those conversations. Call when Carlo's on. I know you enjoy those conversations with atheists. And I feel like... I don't know what we've done, but we're getting fewer calls from atheists. And I don't know how we've driven away the atheists. Every now and then we do, but not as much as we used to. And it could be a good sign, like maybe atheism is waning, and I would take that as a good sign if more people were believing in God. But I doubt that that's the case. So I do want to, we're not taking calls today. So easy for me to say today, but call anytime. We do like talking with you. And we welcome those questions. This next one, what we're doing today is we're taking calls that we couldn't take because the person dropped. Just a drop call, open forum. But we like their questions, so we wanted to take them. David in Pennsylvania was watching on YouTube, and he called up and said, why is there a waiting period for the church to baptize candidates? And I know that this bugs some people. And it bugs some people because they're like, Philip, he baptized the Ethiopian, or, right. Why don't we just do it the way Philip did it?
Yeah, it's not an absolute necessity, but we're dealing with ordinary circumstances, right? And then asking what's the rationale behind or the reasons for this waiting period. So with regard to, basically, I think we can say that the church is following the early church practice of preparation for baptism, instruction in the mysteries of faith and the mysteries of the sacraments. Currently, this is known as RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. But why wait? Well, one possible answer is to make sure that the person preparing for baptism really knows what he or she is getting into as a Christian.
Yeah.
So you really want to know what you're assenting to. And secondly, to really get an understanding of the first reason is knowing what the Christian life entails. Like this is how you need to be living as a Christian. And that's going to require a lot of change in some cases, right? But also to know the mysteries of faith that you are assenting to intellectually. To say, I believe these things revealed by God as a Christian. And so that's part of the preparation as well. So in order to attain the proper head knowledge for an informed assent by the mind to believe these things, but also a proper formation of the heart knowledge to know the Christian lived experience of what you're jumping into and what you're going to have to take on as a Christian just in your whole lifestyle, and which, as I mentioned, requires that some things might have to change given your prior lifestyle and prior lifestyle choices. And so I think for those two reasons, that provides a rationale or a basis for why in ordinary circumstances a person needs to go through that preparation, because not everybody comes to the church in the way that, say, Scott Hahn came to the Catholic Church, whenever he converted and, reading all of these books, and he was more formed than most people in the Catholic Church, right?
Right, yeah.
Now, granted, he didn't have to get baptized in order to become Catholic, but in order to be confirmed and in full communion, in that sort of circumstance, a priest might make an exception and say, if somebody comes and not a non-baptized person, did all of this studying and has been sort of swimming in the Christian waters of the Christian community for a long time as a non-baptized person, well, then a priest might make that exception and say, hey, I'll baptize you this weekend, right?
I see, yeah.
But not everybody saying, I want to be Catholic, I want to be baptized, is in that circumstance, is in that state, right? They may come to the church and say, I really want to be baptized, but not have this sort of deeper understanding of what the Christian life and Christian belief is all about. And so there's going to be a need of that time of preparation, of course, again, in ordinary circumstances. Now, this, I think, the implied question here is, well, what happens if somebody doesn't make it to baptism? And I think that's what's really driving the question.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Why are you going to wait so long if baptism is so important and necessary? What happens if they don't get it? Or are they not going to be saved or something?
Right.
Well, if we're talking about a catechumen, and that's the word to describe a person who is explicitly seeking to be baptized, right? The Council of Trent teaches that justification from original sin is not possible without the washing unto regeneration, baptism, or the desire for the same. So this is, in our tradition, known as an explicit desire for baptism. That suffices to receive the graces of baptism and thus be saved. So if a person's getting ready for baptism in RCIA and they happen, unfortunately, to die before baptism, that explicit desire is sufficient in order to receive the graces of baptism. Catechism affirms this in paragraph 1259. Now, here's the next question. Well, what about somebody who's not a catechumen? Somebody who's not explicitly desiring or seeking baptism, but nevertheless has invincible ignorance. They're not responsible for their ignorance. Well, we could take the position of Aquinas. Here's what Aquinas says in his work called On Truth, De Veritate, question 14, article 11. In his response to the first objection, he says, God would either reveal to him through internal inspiration what had to be believed, or would send some preacher of the faith to him as he sent Peter to Cornelius. That's what Aquinas says. So either God's going to infuse that knowledge, here's what you got to believe, yes or no. Or send a preacher to preach to the person, here's what you got to believe, do you respond, yes or no? Or we could take the Church's current position, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church in paragraph 1260, every man who is ignorant of the gospel of Christ and of his church, but seeks the truth and does the will of God in accordance with his understanding of it, can be saved. It may be supposed that such person would have desired baptism explicitly if they had known its necessity. This is commonly referred to as an implicit desire for baptism versus the explicit desire of the catechumen. So is it possible for a non-catechumen to be saved without baptism? The bottom line answer is yes, it's possible. But by whatever grace he is saved by, that's coming from Jesus, baby.
That is coming from Jesus.
Because he is the way,
baby.
the truth, and the life. You like that, baby?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. I love that answer. And thanks very much to David in Pennsylvania for the question. I hope that was helpful to you, David. Not giving out the number today because all the questions are questions that already came to us by the phone, but the caller dropped. It's called Drop Call Open Forum. Lots and lots of calls and questions for Carlo this hour. And Carlo, I'm going to give you one from Christine in Charleston, South Carolina. She was listening on 7:30 a.m., and she called to ask this. We understand that before there was confession, people went to heaven. What changed that now we have to go to confession to get to heaven, but people in the Old Testament did not?
Yeah, good question. So, first of all, we want to affirm the truth that Christine is stating here. It is true that people in the Old Testament, before confession, before the revelation of the sacrament of confession, died in friendship with God, and they went to heaven upon Jesus' ascension. So they went to heaven without a confession. That's true. We believe that. Now, what is assumed in the second part of Christine's question is false, namely that confession is absolutely necessary to go to heaven.
Okay.
And so that is something we do not claim. We do say that confession is necessary for our salvation, and I'm talking about going to confession to be remitted of the guilt of mortal sin. It is necessary for salvation to be in friendship with Jesus in ordinary circumstances, okay? So ordinary circumstances would be a circumstance beyond, for example, imminent death, right, where you don't have access to a priest, or special revelation that I've been actually forgiven of the guilt of my mortal sin through perfect charity.
Yeah.
I mean, that's possible, and that brings up this point that as Catholics, we believe, we profess, we teach that perfect contrition is what I meant to say, which involves perfect charity. Perfect contrition would be sufficient for the remission of the guilt of mortal sin. But that perfect contrition involves the intention to receive the sacrament of confession for those who know about it. So is it possible to have the guilt of mortal sin taken away through perfect contrition without the sacrament of confession? Yes, it is possible. But the only way I'm going to know that is if God gives me a special revelation of that, right? So that special revelation, that would be an extraordinary circumstance where confession is not necessary for salvation or an imminent death. I don't have access to a priest. So if I have perfect contrition at that moment of death, that would suffice to remit the guilt of mortal sin and thus be saved. And so I can be saved without the sacrament of confession. But in ordinary circumstances, and I'm guilty of mortal sin, I need the sacrament of reconciliation in order to be reestablished, spiritually resurrected, to be reestablished in friendship with Jesus Christ, and thus being in a saving state, right? Thus, if I die in that friendship, I would be saved, finally speaking. So it's important that we expose this flawed assumption that confession is absolutely necessary. In other words, in all circumstances, without confession, you cannot go to heaven. That is not what we believe.
Okay.
But at the same time, that doesn't mean in ordinary circumstances, confession is not the path you need to take in order to have the guilt of mortal sin taken off of your soul so that you can go to heaven. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I think that makes very good sense. We got to take a break, Christine, but thanks very much for that question from Charleston, South Carolina. We'll take a very quick break and be right back with more Drop Calls Open Forum with Karlo Broussard.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Wherever you are in the world, you can access the EWTN Global Catholic Network. It's everywhere. You can get EWTN's great Catholic programming on your car radio, at home on your TV, computer, or smart speaker. With EWTN's app, you can take EWTN everywhere on your phone or mobile device. If you want your news in print, turn to EWTN's paper of record, the National Catholic Register. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Merry Christmas to you. It's the fourth day of the 12 days of Christmas. And Karlo Broussard is here with us. And this is a good Karlo question coming up because it's a complicated one, but one I think you can put into terms that we can understand. And I don't want to avoid complicated questions because it's a good one. Adam in Ohio asked. Adam was watching on YouTube. He called up to ask this. What is the difference between the Thomistic view of predestination and the Calvinistic view? That's the first question.
Yeah.
And then he says, do you hold a Thomistic view or Molinistic view of free will?
Yeah.
Now, these are hard questions. Predestination and free will are hard questions.
Yeah,
but
and it also assumes a lot of background knowledge about these different positions and stuff.
Right.
So suffice to say, we can't get into all the details here, but I thought it would be a good question to address to try to give somewhat of a summarized conceptual framework of the two. I can only make assertions here without any sort of justification for and against either of the views. So let's take the first question concerning predestination. Now, there's two senses of this. A strict sense, which would refer to those human beings who will be finally saved. At the end of time, all those people with Jesus on the new heaven and the new earth, right? Experiencing the beatific vision. The wide sense of predestination can refer to God's preordained plan of providence, right? But with regard to the strict sense concerning the difference between the Thomistic and the Calvinistic view, you have the same end result. That's basically when this question comes up, we're talking about that strict sense of predestination. Who's going to finally be saved? We both agree with the end result, a numbered group that will finally make it, right? Where we differ is the mode of free will or the preservation of human free will in attaining that end result of being finally saved. So the Thomistic view, following St. Thomas Aquinas and his thought, has a nuanced view of God causing our free choices, and that's something else we're going to agree with our Calvinist friends. God causes our free choices. But from the Thomist view, God causes our free choices in a way that actually preserves the mode of human freedom. Unlike, for example, if I cause you to do something, like I'm physically coercing you to get out of this room,
okay,
that would be a circumstance where I'm actually violating your mode of human freedom.
Right.
The end result, you getting out of the room, in this case, would not be a result of your free will. It's going to be all me, right?
Gotcha.
So my causation of you is not preserving your freedom, it's violating your freedom.
Okay.
The Thomist view has a nuanced way of showing how when God causes me to do something to bring about some result through the use of my free choice, that my free choice is still free. That freedom is preserved. Now, again, that's a claim that needs justification. I can't do that here. On the other hand, opposing that view, the Calvinistic view is going to agree with the Thomists that God causes our free choices, but it's just that causation does not preserve the mode of freedom. That the end result is going to be entirely God. That the free will in no way is free in God causing the will to do some action, right? For me to make some choice.
Got it.
So the key difference there is going to be one view preserves a mode of human freedom, the other view violates it or does not. That's going to be the difference between the Thomistic view and the Calvinistic view. Now, concerning the question of Thomist or Molinist view of free will, again, the Thomist view says God causes our free choices, but he causes us in a way that we can act in a way that's in accord with our mode of freedom. There's a preservation of that mode of freedom. Now, the Molinist view, this is coming from Luis Molina, a 16th century Spanish Jesuit priest. He says, or as I understand him in his teaching and those who follow him, God does not cause our free will or our free choices, to be more precise. Freedom is sort of a no-fly zone for God, right? God orders our choices according to his plan, right? So he takes into consideration our free choices within his providential plan based upon his perfect knowledge of those choices and things that my choices or possible choices could bring about. But notice that on this view, the Molinist view, free choices are no-fly zone for God's causation. God's not causing, bringing into actuality, right? Making it to be that I'm freely choosing something. So that's the Molinist view. Whereas the Thomist view is going to say, no, God is causing our free choices, bringing it into actuality, making it be. But because he's God, his causation's very different than when I cause you to do something.
Right.
So
he has the power.
His causation is not going to violate my freedom. It's actually going to make my freedom be, make my free choice be. Now, to the question, which view do I adopt? I personally, my opinion, and the church has not given any sort of definitive answer to this question of which view is correct, right? I personally hold to the Thomist view, and for two reasons, one positive, one negative. So if we take the positive reason, think about this. God is the cause of all being, and even every mode of being, like however being is going to be shaped or formed, right? If you think of it like that. My free choice has being. It's an actuality. It's falling under the umbrella of reality and being. Yeah. And is of a particular mode of being. We call it contingency in philosophy, but it's like a particular way of existing, a particular mode of being. And so therefore it would follow God is the cause of my free choice. Okay? Now the negative reason is this. If we say God doesn't cause my free choice, well then there's some aspect of being that escapes God's causality.
Yeah.
But I thought God was the source of all being, which we affirm he is as God.
Right.
So if we deny that God actually causes my free choices, then I'm saying there's something in being that's not due to God making it be.
Yeah.
And that's robbing God of being the source of all being. And so that conflicts with the classical understanding of God being the source of all being. So for both the positive reason and the negative reason, I favor the Thomist view. But again, that's my personal preference, which I do have an opinion, and I think the arguments are persuasive as it being the right view. But again, I could not bind somebody's conscience to believe it as a good Catholic because the Church has never given us a definitive answer on this question.
But it does strike me that both of those Catholic answers, the Molinist view or the Thomistic view, leave me with a free choice. Whatever happens, my free choice, I am free to choose.
That is correct. Absolutely.
Not being compelled in any way.
That would be an agreement or a similarity between the two views.
Right.
Yeah. The difference being on whether God causes that free choice or not.
All right, Adam, I do appreciate it. I know that's a tough one, but I appreciate that you asked it, and I hope that the answer was helpful to you. This one comes from Andrew in Michigan, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Andrew wanted to know, how should I talk to a non-Catholic who tries to receive the Eucharist?
Well, I think we could start by explaining what Holy Communion entails. So first of all, it's going to entail belief that the Eucharist is the real body and blood of Jesus. So if my friend doesn't believe that, well, then they shouldn't be receiving. Otherwise, they would be lying, right? Going up to do this thing where visibly testifies, I believe that this is Jesus, when in reality you don't. But let's say my friend does believe it. Like, yeah, I believe Jesus is really there. I'm just not going to be a Catholic, right? So what do we say in response? Well, again, explain what Holy Communion entails. Excuse me. Not only does it involve belief that Jesus is really there, but it also visibly testifies to union with the church in everything that the church teaches for us to believe.
Mm-hmm.
So consider this quote from Justin Martyr in the 2nd century, AD 150, in his first Apology, chapter 66. He's talking about the Eucharist, and he says this: "As this food is called among us Eucharistia, the Eucharist, of which no one is allowed to partake, but the man who believes that the things we teach are true, and who has been washed with the washing," that is, baptism. So as Justin Martyr articulates there, in order to receive the Eucharist and Holy Communion, you need to be believing everything that we believe. Why? Because that act of receiving Holy Communion in ordinary circumstances is visibly testifying that I am in communion with the church itself in everything that she proposes for us to believe. So if the individual, so we could ask our friend, do you believe everything that the church believes? And if the answer is no, well, then you ought not to receive at least those things that the church proposes for belief in an infallible way, right? That we need to assent to either with divine and Catholic faith, dogma stuff, or definitive assent, which is all that stuff related to dogma, right?
Right.
Infallible teaching. If the answer is no, well, then we ought not to receive. Why? Because we would be signifying in our bodily gesture, the bodily act of receiving Holy Communion, I believe everything that the Catholic Church proposes to be believed, but in reality, subjectively, I would not be consistent with what that action entails. So there would be a falsification of what the action means, right? It would be a lie. I'd be lying with my body. Pope St. John Paul II used this way of thinking with regard to the sexual act and the conjugal act. That action has a sort of built-in meaning to it, of being ordered to procreation and unitive love. And whenever somebody's going to engage in that activity, they need to make sure that they are consistent, like they're intending what that activity involves. Otherwise, you're going to be acting against the meaning. Right. Similarly here, the act of receiving Holy Communion, there's a built-in meaning in that. Like I'm in communion with the church as a whole, and I believe everything that the church proposes to be believed. And so if that's not the case, I would be acting against that meaning. I would be in conflict with that meaning and thus be lying with that act and lying with my body. Again, in ordinary circumstances, that would be the case.
Thank you very much for that question. I appreciate it. I hope that was helpful to you. I know that a lot of times people are not convinced. I'm always surprised at what a tough one this one is for some people. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know if it just seems like if I'm not a member of something in most areas of the world, like if I don't work here, then I don't get to come to the Christmas party, you know. Or if I'm not a member of the LA Chargers, I don't get to put on the uniform. We get that, but for some reason people are deeply offended that the Catholic Church says, and I know my analogies are kind of weak, but they're deeply offended that the Catholic says this is for the Catholic person who's in full communion with the church. I don't myself understand why that's so offensive to people, but people are deeply offended by it.
And then a possible question would be, well, why do you believe it's really Jesus? What's the power and virtue of which that bread is changed into Jesus? If you believe it's the priest who has the power, well, if you believe the priest has the power to change the bread into Jesus Christ, well, why don't you? And the only reason why you should believe that is because the church has taught us so. So why don't you believe everything else that the church teaches, right? So why are you going to pick and choose only that and not these other things? Or if you think, well, I have the power because of my belief, the bread changes into Jesus Christ, well, then that's something essentially different than what we're professing as Catholics. And so therefore you have, yet again, another conflict with the act and what that entails and what's in your heart.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Carlo. Thanks very much. You should definitely check out Carlo's new podcast, Sunday Catholic Word. It's not too late. Just get started because he's going to go through the full 3-year cycle. As a matter of fact, you can start at any time because basically what it does is Carlo takes a look at the Sunday readings on each Friday, from the perspective of a Catholic apologist. How does he, as a Catholic apologist, think about the Bible readings for this Sunday in a way that helps explain and defend the Catholic faith. So build up your apologetics chops, but also prepare for Sunday Mass each Friday with Sunday Catholic Word. SundayCatholicWord.com or Mr. Catholic Podcast.
Mr. Sunday Podcast.
Oh, sorry. Dang it. MrSundayPodcast.com. Thanks, Carlo.
Thank you, Sai. It was fun.
That does it for us. Tomorrow, one of the 2 big year-end shows. We'll see you then, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.